too disastrous. So this is the, oh, see, my Instagram phone is in the camera view of YouTube. So hopefully this won't be too bad. Good morning, Helen. Good morning, everyone. This is session 5 of the Reaching Sewalong. So if you have any questions, feel free to post them. I'm making sure that everything looks okay in YouTube. I'm familiar with Instagram Live. I've only gone live once on YouTube, and it was through a different app. So this time I'm doing it directly on YouTube, and it looks like it's working, but I don't know. So I think we're okay, but at least we'll have Instagram. And I just got a pop up that Jamie's going live on YouTube. So something's working apparently. So yeah, so if you have any questions of the Reaching Sewalong, feel free to post them along the way, and I will do my best to answer them along the way. We are not too far along in the Sewalong, so we only have like sections P and Q and sections T and F. I think that we've sewn so far. F is just that one piece, so that was a nice, easy one too. So this week I'm kind of doing a little bit of a catch up because I got off schedule. I won't get into details because you don't want to see me cry this morning. But life got in the way, and I got off schedule as soon as the Sewalong started, pretty much. So I'm just trying to get caught up at this point. This week I want to talk about fixing some mistakes. And we're going to start kind of at the very beginning. Like if you've just started foundation paper piecing, or you've just started a section and you make a mistake on that first stitch, what do you do? And then even if you finish your quilt and you just notice that you've made a mistake, because it happens. But even if you get to the very end of your quilt and you notice a mistake, what do you do? So there's several options. And we're going to cover all of those. And then we'll talk about why I don't worry about grain line in foundation paper piecing. Because I do get that question a lot, especially in class. Do you need to worry about grain line when you're putting fabric to paper? So we'll talk about that. So I'm going to hop right into it. But essentially, let's pretend that you have sewn one piece. This is like a little shrunk down Legit Kits block. It's the Sail Away. It's a Sail Away block, and I use this in my classes for teaching because it's just a cute little block. And then you can actually turn it into a postcard. So it's a lot of fun. So we make this just as an introduction. Get acquainted with foundation paper piecing before you actually break into your kits. So it's just a nice way to do it. But anyway, so I've kind of done a couple of these just as our samples this morning. So let's pretend that you've sewn your first 2 pieces and you have already noticed a mistake. Like maybe your colors are wrong, maybe your colors are backwards. Either way, there's a couple options at this point that you have. So if you've just sewn that first seam and realize it's wrong, don't panic. And you don't even have to seam rip in this case. So what I'm going to do is take some tape, and I like the Scotch brand. It's the matte tape. It's not the shiny tape. It's just a matte tape. And I will take a piece of tape and put it right on that seam line on the paper. Let me see if I can do this backwards. Okay, I'll probably have to do 2 pieces of tape because that one was not right on the seam line all the way down. But put a piece of tape, let's do it this way, right on that seam line. So that seam that I just sewed, there. Now that seam is taped. Okay, so now it's taped, and you don't even have to seam rip your fabric. You can just tear your fabric directly off that paper, because what we've done is we've reinforced the paper. So when we tear the fabric off, your paper is still one piece. You're not going to tear your paper into. Now you can reuse this. So if you just have one seam sewn and you realize your mistake, tape your seam, tear your paper, tear your fabric off, and then you can reuse it. So you can start over, fresh start, not a problem. If it's just a matter of your fabrics are reversed, so say I had it like this, I had it like this, and say, I had 1 and 2, but really it's supposed to be 1 and 2, something like that. Tear your paper off, flip this around, line it up with that seam line, and then just kind of pin this into place and go on with 3 and 4, because it doesn't have to be sewn through the paper if you're foundation paper piecing. As long as that seam line lines up with the paper. So you see how I've got, okay, on the bottom, I'm going to move it over. See how now, I'm working backwards, but see how now that seam line is lined up with the sewing line? That's what really matters. So you can reuse that piece of fabric if it's just a matter of swapping your two colors. If it's a matter of these are completely wrong, then set them aside, use them for something else, but at least your paper has been saved. So that's if you're just starting off and you sewed like your first seam wrong. Let's say you've got several seams done and you realize this one is wrong, and you do have to whip out your seam ripper. So I have a reel on Instagram posted with a couple tips for seam ripping, and they've gone viral all of a sudden. So the first reel has like 3 million views. It's ridiculous. So essentially, your key here is a sharp seam ripper. Someone in one of my classes made me this. Well, her husband made it and she gave it to me. Isn't it gorgeous? And so you can get refills for these. So they're very fancy, but a sharp seam ripper is really your key. So you don't have to pick at these individually. And you don't want to put your pointy end, let me see. You don't want to put your pointy end into the fabric because the pointy end will end up sticking into another part of your fabric and ripping it. What you want to do is use that red ball. The red ball is your friend. So use the red ball, put the red ball, and I actually like to do this from the right side of the fabric. So instead of trying to get to it from the seam back here, I'm going to get to it from the right side of the fabric. I don't know why. That's just easier for me. And I will get it started. Let's do this. I'm going to turn in my chair so I can show you. There we go. Okay. YouTube is good. Now I think Instagram is good. Okay. So I'm going to get it started. I'm going to use the point and just feel for a stitch. Did you see that? One stitch. That's all I did. And then I will flip it around, put the ball in there. Let me see if I can. I don't want to do it without looking. But that ball will float and protect your fabric. And then you can run your seam ripper up through there. I think this one is getting a little dull. There we go. See how you have to feel for it? You don't want to push it. You don't want to force it. But if you feel for it, you can feel your stitches. But a sharp seam ripper is your real key here. If you don't want to do it that way, or if your stitches are too small to do it that way, as a rule, the bobbin thread is a tighter thread than your top thread. So what this means is your top thread will come down through the fabric and you'll see a loop of your top thread on the bottom. So it means that your bobbin thread will be the easier one to pull out. So here I can almost put my seam ripper in there and I can pretty much pull that whole section of thread out because it's my bobbin thread. Your bobbin thread will pull out much easier than your top thread. So this one here too, I can put my seam ripper in there and just pretty much pull. Like if I snip it occasionally and then put my seam ripper in there, I can pretty much pull that whole length of thread out. So don't try and pull from the top thread. Like don't try and pull from over here. Pull from your bobbin because your bobbin is what's going to come out more easily. And then, so let's say we've got this off. You can also just snip occasionally and then pull from the top after you get all of those snipped. Whoops, I'm pulling on the wrong one. Where are you, buddy? Oh, I wasn't. I was pulling on the right one. Huh. So once you get, a good bit of them snipped on the back, you can pretty much just pull it from the other side. You don't have to snip every single little stitch because once you get, so often snipped, that top thread will come out. Okay, so there's several different ways to use a seam ripper, and I think I even have another way on my Instagram account. But essentially, use the red ball. Good morning, Christy. How are you? So let's talk about if you get your quilt done and despite your best efforts, you have noticed a mistake, because it happens. It happens to all of us. It happens often. It's a huge pain. but it happens. So actually, I'll give you a really good, for instance, this quilt right here, my little puppy quilt. If you notice these little silver reflections, silver spots in the fur. Let's see Instagram and YouTube are in two different places. Instagram is here. YouTube is here. Okay. See, the silver is lighter. It's lighter than I really wanted it to be, but I didn't quite realize until I got the whole thing together. So there's a couple different ways to fix this. Or say you just have one little piece of fabric in the wrong place. It happens. It happens even like still to me often, unfortunately. There's a couple things you can do. The first one is actually rip it out. You know, if it's something that you feel like you can't get past, you'll never forgive yourself, you'll never unsee, then yeah, you should rip it out. If it's something that is in a convenient spot, you can applique over it. And when I say applique over it, I don't mean like take a large piece of fabric and just cover the whole thing. I mean, take a piece of fabric that is the shape of the piece that you need to replace. So say you want to replace this number 3, you make a little applique the size and shape of that number 3, and then you just applique it onto the top of your quilt over the wrong fabric, and do like a whip stitch, a needle turn applique, something like that. You can applique right on top of your finished quilt, or even your quilt before you quilt it, your finished quilt top. You can also, what I did here, so let me do this again. Instagram, see how this color, this light silver is different than this is a little bit darker, and this is a little bit darker right there. On YouTube, where are we here? There. YouTube, see how this light color is a little bit lighter than this color here and this color here. Boy, this is weird because one is backwards, one is not. One is over here, one is over here. So technically, these used to be the same color, but when I got this done, I realized I didn't like the contrast. This is really just supposed to be like a highlight and not so much of that contrast. What I actually did was I took a Sharpie to these sections here just to try it out. And I like that it's not as high of a contrast. So you absolutely can take a marker, a permanent marker. Sharpie is color fast and it's considered a fabric dye. So if you use Sharpies on your quilt, you're essentially turning them into multimedia quilts. So you're not cheating. You're not doing something that's not accepted by the quilting gods. Not that we care what they say anyways, but I mean, essentially your quilt is now a multimedia quilt because you have painted it. So use some Sharpies and color in. So for instance, if I had, if I had done the wrong color and it's enough of a, if it's the kind of color that I can color in, like if I needed to, if this was supposed to be blue instead of pink, then you might be able to get away with it. If it's supposed to be purple instead of pink, absolutely. Color it in with blue. You might get a purple. Test it in a inconspicuous spot or on the seam allowance, but you absolutely can take markers to your quilt. This works really well too if you finish your quilt and you realize that you are seeing your stitches, especially through some of the thick seams you will maybe. You can take a fine little Sharpie tip to those threads, just the threads, and kind of color in your threads so that they're a little more inconspicuous. So don't be afraid to turn your quilts into multimedia artworks, paint on them, draw on them, whatever you need to do. So I will actually eventually color in the rest of him because I want all of his very light silver highlights to be a little bit darker. So don't be afraid to color in, to have fun, to experiment, test it on a piece of scrap, test it on something else, but absolutely nothing wrong with that. So you can applique on top, you can rip it out if you have to, but if you've got the whole thing done and you don't want to rip, or maybe it's all quilted and you can't very easily rip, applique or just color it in with Sharpies. Okay, so I want to talk about grainline because a question I get often, especially in class, and I'm telling them, put the fabric on the back of the paper and sew it, and then, inevitably somebody will ask, do we need to worry about grainline? Do we need to worry about which way this fabric is going? And I love the question because it is a very good question. The answer is no. I never I rarely worry about grain line in foundation paper piecing. And there's a couple of reasons for this. One, for the most part, the kind of foundation paper piecing I'm doing and most of us are doing, even if I plan this one out perfectly and say I'm going to have grain lines going this way, there's a very good chance that the block that's right next to it will have grain lines going the same way, a different way. So even if I plan this out and say I'm going to choose my grain lines, I can't do that with every single thing to the point where they will actually make sense. So if I say I want all of my grain lines going horizontally, I cannot feasibly always make that work, because no matter what you do on one block, there's always going to be something else that, it'll be next to something that will either contradict or it won't always work out. And with that being said, a lot of times, even if you have grain line going one way on one block, the grain line will go another way on the next block, and they're going to join together anyways and offset each other. Even if the grain line is kind of going the same way for both blocks, okay, you're going to sew them together with paper. That's one foundation. That's one stabilizer. Then you're going to add them to a backing and a batting. That is another foundation, another stabilizer, and then you're going to quilt the whole thing together. So only in a very specific situation would I worry about grain line in foundation paper piecing. It is just not the same kind of thing that we need to worry about with like a traditional quilting. It is just not the same thing, and I do not worry about it. The only time I might even think about it is if I'm doing a legit kit and I have, one of those like blocks that are one piece of fabric, and that's only because it's convenient to cut it on the grain line. It's not convenient to cut that block on a diagonal anyways. If something happened, and I think I've even done this before, that where like the only piece of fabric I have left is a diagonal piece of fabric, I'm going to cut my block on that diagonal. I'm not going to say, let me repiece this piece of fabric so that now I have fabric on the straight of grain and I can now put that on my block. If that's all I have left, I'm going with it. But if I'm cutting a piece of fabric for a solid block, usually it works out that it's on the straight of grain, and that's okay. It's not because I'm worried about it or I'm planning it out. That's just how it's going to cut out the best. So that's how I'll do it. But I do not worry about grain line and foundation paper piecing. We have so many backups and so many foundations, and your backing is on straight of grain. And even if your backing's not on straight of grain, I mean, you could put a quilt top backed with a quilt top and it would still be okay, because then that's the whole point of quilting, and that's your stabilizer right there. So I do not worry about grain line. So next week, let me check real quick what our actual assignment is for next week's Sew Along, because I haven't done it yet. So this is the 22nd. Oh, we get a break week next week. What do you know? So next week is a break week, which means I will be sewing to try and get caught up and ahead. I have to get ahead of schedule. The week after that is L and K sections. So make sure that you come back June 5th. And we have sections T and F and P and Q done by then, but we have a break week. So if you haven't started yet, this is a great time to go ahead and get hopping and get going. And then we even have a second break week, June 19th. June is going to be a crazy month for me. That's kind of why I built in a lot of breaks for June, because I am teaching pretty much every week. Not pretty much. I'm teaching every week. It's going to be a crazy month, but it's going to be an amazing month. And it's my month of beginning like new things. I'm teaching in Pigeon Forge for the first time. I've got a retreat in Michigan for the first time. I'm in Las Vegas teaching for the first time. I'm in Cleveland, not for the first time, but I'm hoping this is the first time I actually get to stay in Cleveland through the whole event. Last two times I was in Cleveland, I had to leave early both times. So this one, I'm saying it here. I am staying in Cleveland the whole time. I'd like to actually enjoy what I hear is a lovely city. So I'll be at a retreat in Cleveland. And then we go to Hawaii and California for classes in Kona, Hawaii and Mission Viejo, California, the last week in May. So next week I will be at a fiber festival in Franklin, Indiana, not too far from me, just south of town. So if you want to learn to crochet or knit, that's where you can come do that. First week in June is Pigeon Forge, Tennessee for a mountain quilt fest. And one of my quilt coat classes is full. I have another one that we opened up. So if you want to do a quilt coat, you can join that class. And then I have a divided travel case class, and I have a foundation paper piecing class there. Karen Klopper says, where can I access the patterns for this FPP? Are you talking about the Reaching Sewalong? Because if so, you can go to crankykangaroo.com and click on the Reaching Sewalong tab. That has all of the information you need. It has the schedule, it has the links, it has everything you need there. If you're talking about this guy, he's Patterson. He's one of my foundation paper piecing patterns on crankykangaroo.com. So the Bernese Mountain Dog is crankykangaroo.com in my shop. But the Reaching Sewalong, you can still join. If you want just the pattern for the Reaching Sewalong, it's from ansewI.com, and that link is also on my website. So everything you need for the Sewalong is at crankykangaroo.com, and then just click on the Reaching Sewalong tab. And then let's see. So we will not be here next week. We'll be back June 5th for sections L and K, June 12th for sections R and S. June 19th is a break. And then we pretty much finish up August 28th. We start sewing the sections together. So we'll make good progress on this. I do love this quilt because it goes quickly. I know some of these large sections are kind of overwhelming. They are a little cumbersome and a little awkward, but I love that because once you get past that awkwardness, you have like this large chunk of quilt completed, and that makes it very satisfying. Good morning, Jocelyn. So I do know that it's a departure from a legit kit, from a block by block format, but it means that we make very quick progress. We make good use of our fabric. We can cut large chunks out of our fabric and just get it done. And I love that so much. So if you feel like you're behind, you still have time to catch up. You still have time to get back on schedule, or you don't have to be on schedule at all. You can still just kind of sew along with us. We are going to eventually talk about quilting options, and there is a really cool quilt that someone finished where she has a lot of embellishments on her quilt, and it is just amazing. So I'm hoping to actually get to interview her and talk to her. And then there is someone who is offering a discount on quilting services for the Reaching quilt when you finish. So we'll have details on that soon as well. So like I said, hopefully we'll get back on schedule. And I think this gives us a good shot because next week is a break week. So if you have any questions along the way, message me, email me, comment on the videos, whatever you need to do to get my attention. And hopefully I will see y'all around soon. Thanks for coming. I'm going to see if I can log out of both of these and stream on YouTube. That is correct. I want to no longer be live. And then